Hey everyone, Katie and Sergeant Steele here, and today I want to talk to you about the changes to the Indirect Fire rule and what it means for the Astra Militarum. So, here in front of you is a collection of our current artillery units in a way. This is not everything, and nor does all of this even have indirect fire anymore. The Hydra never really has, but it's still kind of part of the kit for like the Wyvern, right? Which is over here. We also have the new field ordnance batteries with the bombast field guns, Basilisk, Manticore, Deathstrike, Earthshaker Carriage, which is still being produced and sold by Forge World, and many others. The Colossus Bombard, which also strangely lost its indirect rule, and so on and so forth. And so what I want to talk to you about is how the indirect rule changes in June 2024 Balance Dataslate has impacted the way we're going to play with our artillery. So what the indirect fire rule does now, as of June 2024, is if you're shooting an indirect fire weapon, right? So Earthshaker Cannon, the Manticore missiles, the Deathstrike missile, the Wyvern, Storm Shard mortar, the Bombast field gun, etc., and you do not have line of sight. So that's the key thing. You don't have line of sight of your enemy. So you're having to take advantage of the indirect ability of your weapons. Then you are -1 to hit. Your opponent gets the benefits of cover. And you always miss on a 1, 2, or 3 regardless. Now, I have done a poll on my YouTube to talk about whether there was anything to kind of negate that, and specifically Daring Recon from Scout Sentinels. 80% of you agreed that Daring Recon does not, in fact, negate this change to the indirect fire ability. So that means there's no way we can get around the always missing on 1s, 2s, and 3s for our indirect fire weapons when shooting without line of sight. And that's one of the key things I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So what this is going to impact is basically setting still and trying to take advantage with heavy on your Basilisk when out of line of sight is pretty much pointless. Same with kind of other heavy weapons. So you should just bet if you're using artillery as artillery and it's hiding out somewhere and lobbing over tops of the ruins and the buildings and the forests, you're only going to be hitting on a 4, 5, and 6. It's just important for you to know so you can plan for the amount of damage or impact you're going to have. Luckily, with a lot of these, they have special abilities on their weapons, right? So the Earthshaker cannons get -2 to movement. The Storm Shard mortar here grants -1 to their hit rolls in the preceding phase for the enemy unit that was hit because they're suppressed, and so on and so forth. So there are abilities that you can still take advantage of. So there's still reasons to take artillery. So don't get me wrong about that. Artillery is not dead. It's just not egregious. Now let me talk about that. The reason it was egregious before is because you could have a Basilisk out of line of sight. You give it take aim. You do Daring Recon with a Scout Sentinel. You are hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s with a Basilisk. That's pretty big. That just doesn't feel right. Was that the intent of how artillery was meant to work? I don't really think so. And so they did need to kind of rein it in. And even I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of doing that with my Basilisk and getting it out there and just pulverizing Space Marines with this unit. And then even with other units that weren't as egregious, like the field ordnance batteries with the bombast field guns, it still allowed you to negate all the negatives and pretty much just rain terror down on your opponents. So now we are at a more balanced state of artillery. It's not ideal. You're not going to be running heavy artillery lists, but I think you will still want to bring artillery in your games. So let's talk about how you're going to do that. Of course, you just take it and use it as we are talking about right now. You're going to always miss it on 1, 2, or 3. So you sit this stuff back there and you hit troops and you hit elites and you hit infantry, right? You hit literally anything with the Deathstrike and you're going to hurt it. And you're going to be taking out infantry targets and so forth. And each of these still serves a role. And I'll go over that each in their own video. I'm going to do an update video on every piece of guard artillery. And so you could do that. But another strategy you have is actually one that I've been trying out and so far has been decently effective. So what that is is I still love my Basilisk. I love that -2 movement and its ability to kill. It kills infantry, and it also slows down infantry as well. So whether or not I want to try to negate a charge from my opponent, or I want to take out their backfield unit sitting on their objective. What I've been doing, and I'm going to put a diagram up here to show you, is I've been taking the Basilisk and placing it into the ruins in my deployment zone. Now, this is assuming you're using the match play rules and you're using like the Pariah Nexus or Tyrannic War cards. And I've been placing this in the front ruins. Now, in my local club, my local organization, we also typically play terrain's rules as written. So that means if there's a window and there's a door, I can see out of the ruins. We do not play with the WTC rules of it blocks line of sight on the ground floor. So that allows me to put my artillery somewhat forward. I usually then screen it with sentinels and infantry and so forth, so it can't be easily charged. And I set it in a position where it can see down the firing lanes to the middle of the table and usually down to a flank. And then it can also be concealed from my opponent's heavy hitters, usually in their deployment zone, turn 1. Early, I usually play very aggressive with my guard, and I'll move everything else forward. So my artillery is usually actually the least of the worries of most of my opponents. Then, when my opponents jump out into the middle of the table or down the lanes of fire, they often forget this is sitting in those ruins. And I can see out of the ruins. And I've given it take aim. And I have sentinels for daring recon. I'm still hitting on 2s, and I'm still rerolling 1s with direct fire from my Basilisk. And you could do the same thing with all of these different artillery. Well, like I said, the Hydra is not actual artillery, it just comes in the kit. So anyhow, you can do that and still have your artillery be super effective. At the same time, you have the option to shoot indirect to try to whittle away the units in the backfield as needed. So I think this is a way we can still utilize our artillery. Think about strategic placement of it. Now, this is going to be rule specific, obviously. A lot of people like to play ground floor blocking line of sight. I'm just going to be super frank. I think it's a lame way to play because it just takes all the immersion out of it for me. And I love building beautiful terrain and playing on beautiful terrain and having immersive tables. And that doesn't feel immersive to me. It's fine to build buildings with blocking line of sight, but you should have some that you can also see through. It should be a mix. It should be a well-balanced table. And so when doing that, I think you can also think about forwarding your artillery up in the table and try to utilize it that way. The other things you can do is, daring recon still works, like I just said, even with indirect. So you can still reroll your 1s. So you're hitting on 4, 5s, and 6s, rerolling 1s. Not bad. With your field ordnance batteries, here, these have heavy. And so without daring recon, they're still going to be hitting on 5s because they're only ballistic skill 5. So you may want to give them a take aim order. You may want to use daring recon to negate that -1 so these can hit. And you can still use these out of line of sight. The Manticore is still your best against elites and anti-armor. And so you can kind of maneuver it around or bring it around. And actually, I think the -1 to hit with the Wyvern is not bad. Especially when you hit one of your opponent's shooting units and you're able to diminish their ability by 16% to harm your units. And I think that's always an effective thing when you can change the die rolls of your opponent's units and their abilities and their weapons. So each of these things are still going to play a role. There's different ways to play them. You could tuck them in. You could jump them out. I like doing a mix of both with the Basilisk. I've not been running the others as much. When I'm about to start running the field ordnance batteries with bombast field guns in my competitive lists. So I'll be doing this in July, trying this out. I have a theory here about how I want to work them on the battlefield. And so I'll report back on that as I progress along. So that's it on the updates. That's it on the changes. I think it's a change that was needed. It hurts. You guys know I love my artillery if you've been around me for a while. This isn't even a third of my artillery collection. It's not even a fourth. It's not even a fifth. I love artillery. I have a ton of it. When I often go to Pittsburgh for the Apocalypse games that I play in, I usually bring like 9 pieces of artillery minimum. It's so much fun. I'm not excited to see it kind of put in the middle of the road, but that's where it belongs. That's where it should be, because it doesn't feel good when you're playing against somebody and they don't even have to move. They don't even have to play the game. They can just sit still, shoot you, and your army disappears from the table. And I have done that dozens of times as a guard player over the years, and my opponents didn't feel great about it. So it's good that they have balanced the game this way, but I also don't think artillery is dead, and I think there's ways that we can rethink our deployments, rethink our shooting with them, and that's going to change the impact of these units on the battlefield. All right, I've rambled on long enough. I really appreciate all of you watching this video and my content. So if you are enjoying it, please like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you all being here and building a positive community with me. It really means a lot. But most importantly, have fun wargaming, and remember, Cadius stands.